Hey everybody, this is Kyle from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I'm on the field team. I'll be taking the place of Renee as MC for this evening. We'll give everybody a couple minutes to get logged on. Our clock is showing 6 o'clock, so check back in about a couple minutes. Thanks.
We've got 8 people.
Hello everyone, we're going to get started. First, I just wanted to do some introductions of everybody in the room. I'm Kyle Arbuckle, I'm on the field team like I said, and with me I have
Angie Whitehurst from Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Joey Lindstrom on the field team here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition.
And Ed Grelmick, I'm also on the coalition staff.
And Sonia, are you on?
I'm getting on.
I think I heard.
Yeah, she's here. Yep.
All right. So the first thing we wanted to do is do a policy update. Ed was going to provide a little update on, sorry, what? Oh. So the agenda for today, as we did introductions, we're going to do a policy update, and then we'll do a field update for me and Joey, and then Angie will present on our peer sharing topic, which is networking with elected officials and decision makers in housing, and then we'll go over next steps. So Ed, if you want to give just a quick update on the AFFH rule.
Yeah, hello everybody. So I just want to give you a little bit of information about Carson's proposed affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which is not, in fact, even a fair housing rule. The Fair Housing Act, as you might know, made discrimination illegal. But a lot of people don't also know that it also recognized that federal housing policies led to segregation policies such as redlining and FHA mortgage covenants. Therefore, that 1968 Act requires all federal agencies to take actions to overcome that segregation by, quote unquote, affirmatively furthering fair housing. And we all kind of use the acronym AFFH. Just to make it harder to talk about. So now the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968, but there were no meaningful regulations until 2015. Count the years, count the decades. So starting in 2009, HUD, under the Obama administration, began an extensive effort to discuss what a regulation should look like. People from HUD and some of their contractors fanned out across the country talking to a broad array of stakeholders. That includes mayors, county executives, governors, Public Housing Association, PHA staff, developers, fair housing groups, and advocacy groups like the National Income Housing Coalition. Based on that effort, starting in 2009, HUD issued a proposed rule in 2013. HUD then considered all the comments that were submitted in regard to that proposed rule and issued a final rule on July 2015. Jump ahead a few years, and Ben Carson starts making moves to scrap that AFFH rule, leading to the actual suspension of that 2015 rule in January of 2018. Carson's HUD based that suspension on only the first 49 out of 1,200 so-called assessments of fair housing. not to bore you, I'm not going to go into the detail what the hell an assessment of fair housing is. Just trust me that it's a thing. Those assessments of fair housing had to be submitted by local governments. Ultimately, out of that 49, 41 were ultimately accepted by HUD. Now, the proposed rule coming out of Carson's HUD is not a fair housing rule at all. Rather, it's a complete retreat from all efforts to undo historic government-driven patterns of housing segregation and discrimination. The proposed rule considers housing that might be affordable to be the same as housing that is available to people in the Fair Housing Act's protected classes. And there are 7 protected classes: race, color, national origin, sex, family status, disability, or religion. Now, there's a lot that's wrong with that proposed rule. There are 5 major features. I'll skim over some of those. The first major feature is that the proposed rule deletes the word segregation entirely, and it virtually eliminates the word discrimination. Second, particularly important for this audience, is that it lets public housing agencies off the hook. Unlike the 2015 rule, all that PHAs have to say is that they have consulted with the jurisdiction that they're located in, so that the PHA and the jurisdiction can talk about addressing their common affirmatively furthering fair housing issues. A third major problem is that the proposed rule would eliminate a separate public participation requirement regarding affirmatively furthering fair housing. It proposes to lump in fair housing public participation in with the so-called consolidated plan, the CON plan, which already has a public participation process. But fair housing issues are really quite different and often entail different people and different organizations than is usually engaged in the consolidated plan process. Plus, that CON plan process is already jammed, packed full of organizations that are conveying their housing and community development needs and priorities. So the fourth major feature of the proposed rule is that it gets rid of that assessment of fair housing, which I did not really describe for the sake of time, but in its place it proposes to require jurisdictions to have a certification, and that certification has to have 3 goals that address a fair housing choice, and those 3 goals will only have to cover a 5-year period, so it's not much. The rule would also require that the certification describe how each of those 3 goals would affirmatively further fair housing. But in order to streamline the process, in other words, to make it easier really for jurisdictions to avoid compliance with affirmatively furthering fair housing, the proposed rule lists 16 goals that do not even have to be described. So a jurisdiction would save all that time it takes to type up things. Those 16 things are items that HUD misleadingly asserts are inherent barriers to fair housing. So jurisdictions that really don't want to comply with affirmatively furthering fair housing will take the easy way out and pick their 3 goals out of that list of 16. But 13 of those 16 have absolutely nothing to do with fair housing. Rather, they are factors that just might have some marginal effect on the cost of building new housing, and then perhaps maybe inhibit the growth of the supply of housing in a community. What's even worse is that 2 of those 13 protect tenants and workers. It talks about rent control as being a barrier. It talks about labor requirements being barriers to fair housing and affordable housing. And there are another 2 that protect environmental concerns, which is important to everybody. Strangely, it does not include zoning ordinances, which are recognized as major fair housing factors. So basically, increasing the supply of housing overall does not address the many obstacles to fair housing choice for people in the Fair Housing Act's protected classes. And then the final major new feature is that HUD proposes to create a new evaluation process to gauge how jurisdictions are complying with affirmatively furthering fair housing. The 2015 Obama rule didn't even have an evaluation process like this. Continuing HUD's proposed emphasis on supply-side approach to affirmatively furthering fair housing, this new evaluation would focus on measuring the adequacy of a jurisdiction's supply of affordable housing as well as the quality of that affordable housing. HUD proposes to evaluate those jurisdictions looking at 9 factors, but only 2 of those factors even relate to fair housing choice. So again, they're really not addressing fair housing at all. Now, comments are due on March 16th. We urge you all to learn more about this so that you can submit a comment letter. It's really important that HUD hears from residents, particularly public housing residents, about the inadequacy, the gross inadequacy of this proposed rule. How do you learn more about it from just listening to me rattle on for about 5 minutes? You go to our website, Fight for Housing Justice, and there are multiple sample comment letters, some basic talking points, a whole host of media, social media opportunities, and on and on. So that is my 5 minutes of fame.
This is Joey at NLIHC. Ed just mentioned that there are sample comments at the website, fightforjustice.org. They're also attached to the webinar that's happening right now. In your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that there's a place for handouts. And if you click on that, there are a couple of documents that you can easily click on and download. And then I should also mention that right above handouts, there is a box for questions. For any of you who might want to enter a question to ask, just know that that's where you put it in and you can ask a question at any point. But for right now, does anyone have a question for Ed? And I'll point out that you can also raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on your control panel, and we can unmute you for a question to Ed. So I'll give you just 20 seconds to see if anybody raises their hand. Any questions for Ed?
I know that's a lot. I do urge you to go to Fight for Housing Justice and read up. And then if you do have questions after that, send me an email or Sonia Acosta an email, and we'll get back to you.
All right. I think that's it for AFFH. And Kyle, what's next?
All right. Next, we have a budget update from Sonia. Sonia, are you there?
Oh, I think
yes,
Sonia.
I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear
unmuted.
Me?
Good.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Hi, my name is Sonia Acosta. I'm on the policy team, and I'm just going to share a brief update about where we're at with the annual budget process and the annual funding process for HUD and other affordable housing community development programs. So a few weeks ago now, President Trump released his proposed budget. It's very similar to what we've seen in previous years since President Trump took office. It would cut funding for HUD by $8.6 billion, which is about 15%. He proposes to completely eliminate certain programs. Luckily, this is only a proposal, and every year that President Trump has put out these kind of drastic budget requests, Congress has ignored them. Additional things included in his budget requests every year have been imposing work requirements and time limits and increasing rents for HUD residents. His administration put out some proposals around that, but fortunately Congress has not really touched any of that, and it looks like they really have no interest in doing anything around work requirements or raising minimum rents, which is good news. So with the president releasing his budget request, that kind of starts the annual funding process. So next week, next Wednesday, Secretary Carson will actually be in front of a congressional subcommittee. They'll be asking him about this budget request, as well as a bunch of other things that the administration is doing around housing. that should be interesting. And then the House and the Senate subcommittees that focus on HUD will write their bills, introduce them, but it is not likely that anything is going to be finalized until after the presidential election in November. Parties, the Democrats, the Republicans kind of want to see if maybe they want to wait to see if there's a different president or different composition of the parties in the House or the Senate. So they're just going to probably pass a stopgap funding measure that's called a continuing resolution to just kind of get us through to the election, and then we'll see what happens. But it will be kind of a tight year. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of room in the budget caps that Congress and the president set. So hopefully, we are here at NLIHC with a bunch of our national partners. We are up on the Hill talking about the importance of affordable housing and community development programs and why we need to increase funding for them every year so that we can maintain the current level of assistance and not lose any vouchers or homes at all. So that's kind of the basics, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
Thanks, Sonia. I guess like we did last time, we'll just give about 10 to 15 seconds, see if anybody has any questions. All right, I don't think we have any. Sonia, is there anything else you want to mention, or is that about it?
That's it, although I'm always happy to answer any questions that folks might think of later.
Okay, thank you. Go to the next one. All right, now I will give an update on public housing bills that were released, that were introduced in this Congress. We also mentioned them in the last issue of Tenant Talk, which focused on public housing. So just want to give a quick reminder of what they are. So the first one is the Public Housing Emergency Response Act that was introduced by Representative Nydia Velasquez from New York. Senator Elizabeth Warren and 4 other senators introduced an identical bill in the Senate, S31-2, and this bill would provide an additional $70 billion for HUD's Public Housing Capital Fund and allow PHAs to repair and renovate homes. And about $32 billion of this funding would be preserved for the New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA, which is the country's largest PHA. Additionally, in the spring of 2018, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo declared NYCHA was in a state of emergency due to the severely deteriorating conditions of its properties. So we'll be monitoring that bill very closely. The next bill is the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act. This bill had a lot of fanfare around it because it was introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York. This bill would create new HUD grant programs to renovate and upgrade public housing to decrease health hazards and improve energy efficiency. It would also move public housing towards renewable energy sources, and it attempts to provide job opportunities and workforce development to public housing residents. And this would be through improvements to HUD's Section 3 obligation that many of you probably know about, which is the obligation to hire public housing and other low-income residents on maintenance for public housing buildings. And then the next one is the Homes for All Act, introduced by Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota. This also had a lot of fanfare around it because of the dollar signs that were attributed to it. So this would invest about $1 trillion to create 8.5 million public housing apartments. An additional 2.5 million affordable homes would be built to the National Housing Trust Fund. The bill would also repeal the Faircloth Amendment, which we wrote about in Tenant Talk. This is the amendment that doesn't allow for the construction of new public housing without the destruction or pulling off of another public housing building. And additionally, the bill would bar PHAs from repositioning public housing, and that includes demolishing, selling, or converting housing to project-based rental assistance. This bill would not allow public housing agencies to deny housing to someone based on their criminal history or immigration status, and would create a new program to help local governments combat gentrification and neighborhood destabilization. Lastly is the Averting Crises and Housing Assistance Act, introduced by Senator Tammy Duckworth. The bill will require HUD and PHAs to create a plan of action to address poor living conditions in public housing, and Congress would invest $70 billion in the Public Housing Capital Fund to help HUD make needed repairs. As many of you probably know, HUD has a backlog of around $70 billion, so this bill attempts to meet that need. Further, public housing residents would be able to request HUD step in if buildings pass inspection, even though the conditions are unsatisfactory. And residents would be allowed to bring a legal private right of action or lawsuit against the federal government if building conditions are not improved within a year after PHA's revitalization plan of action is finalized. This is also something we mentioned as a needed improvement to public housing for residents as well in our last Tenant Talk. I think that's it. So next, Joey's going to give an update on week and where we are with that and how you can get involved.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, many of you have participated in our Week of Action in the past. This is the fourth year we've done it, and we started in 2017 largely because in that year, if you recall, there was a lot of uprising going on, and there were a lot of marches in D.C. There was the Women's March and the Climate March and the Tax March and the Science March and all these kind of wonderful mobilizations. And we considered doing an event in DC, but eventually thought it might be more effective and more beneficial to our network if we encouraged people to do events in their local communities around the need for housing and the need to support housing programs in the federal budget. And that was the first Week of Action, and we're now on the fourth one. Last year we had more than 120 events. I think it was 127 in 34 states throughout the country. And this year we're hoping to top that number if we can. First, I'll call out that we have a great website, ourhomes-ourvoices.org, with a lot of great resources on it. So our campaign overview, partly as I just mentioned, is that we push for more federal investment in affordable homes and in housing programs. Local events nationwide. We have a lot of helpful infographics and posters and hats and shirts and so forth that people can have for their events. This year, I should really promote that our Week of Action is May 2nd through 12th. I know that's more than a week. It's a 12-day week, but we wanted to pick a time that included both when Congress will be at home districts for many of you who like to invite your members of Congress to your events, and also sometimes when Congress would be in session so that we could hold a national tweet storm and a national call-in day and do some of those types of activities. I mentioned already ourhomes-ourvoices.org. That's where you can see, as the screen shows you right now, options that help you understand how to prepare your event, where you can get information about past events that might encourage you or inspire you to sort of proceed with some of those. And actually, one of the reasons I like to include this slide isn't just to remind you that the website is out there, but also I really like that background picture, which is from an event, I believe, in Boston a couple of years ago, where they had a massive rally for Week of Action that really underscored the unity of their community of advocates in pushing for more housing program resources. We also have, as I mentioned, resources on the website. This includes sample talking points for those of you who are encouraging people to reach out to their members of Congress. We have some sample letters, call-in script. We have postcards to members of Congress that you can print out and mail in. And as you see in all those smiling faces there, a lot of posters and hats and other items that you can get for free if you register your events, or you can order them on our Week of Action merchandise store. The criteria for a local event, as we think of it as for Week of Action, is that it includes the federal budget and federal advocacy at least somewhat. Now, we expect that most of you who participate in Week of Action will do events that focus on some of your local campaigns or your local needs and concerns. We would just hope that the federal budget and the need for more federal resources is sort of a part of your agenda and a part of your messaging. We also hope that events will be both open to the public to participate, so that it's not an event that's just for your members, but also sort of anyone can come and participate and learn and hear from speakers and so forth. and that the media are welcome to attend, and that you please would send out a press advisory to the media in advance. Additionally, we hope that in promoting your events that you'll use some of the Our Homes, Our Voices logos and branding, and the hashtag Our Homes, Our Voices. And then finally, to get your event developed, we're here at NLIHC's field team to help you work through ideas, to help you put together graphics or come up with a petition that you want people to sign, or figure out how to do a voter registration event. The earlier you decide how you're going to proceed with an event, the more we can get to you. In previous years, NLIHC staff like myself or Kyle or Brooke or Tori on the field team have attended events. Diane, our president and CEO, has attended events as a speaker and so forth. And we are able to sort of be there to help provide the content of your teach-in or your rally or whatever the case might be. We also have a small amount of money that we use to support local events to help pay for food or to print out posters or materials. Those are some of the expenses we can cover. Again, especially if we know about it well in advance, it's a lot easier. And sometimes we have bigger grants that we can make available if people let us know what kind of event they're trying to do and how the support we provide would make that event possible. And then finally, we can help promote your event, not just on our website, but also through our social media to our network of followers. And that's Week of Action. I'll pause there actually to see if anybody has any questions before I turn it back over to Kyle. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Reminder, you can hit the raise hand icon or type a question into the questions box. All right, Kyle, I am going to turn it back over to you. Take it away, sir.
All right, thanks, Joey. Real quick, I just wanted to let everybody know that Tenant Talk is now available. We're really excited about this issue. I think it's going to be a good one. I think it is a good one. It's titled "The Path to Housing During Reentry" and focuses on the intersection of criminal justice, the criminal justice system and housing. Far too often, we know too many people returning from the criminal justice system struggle to reintegrate into their communities, into society in general, and particularly with housing because of many different barriers that exist. And you'll see on this cover right here, we listed just several of them, but we fleshed them out within the publication as well. So let me know if you have any questions about Tenant Talk. If you want a physical copy, feel free to reach out to me for that as well. And also, if you have any ideas for an upcoming issue, please let me know. We're happy to field those types of comments. So now we're going to get into our peer sharing topic, which is Angie. She's here with us today to talk about her work here in DC. She's also done some work nationally too, but networking with elected officials and decision makers, particularly with housing. So first, Angie, how about you just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, how you got involved in the housing advocacy, things like that.
Well, I live in Washington, D.C. I'm a native Washingtonian. I've been involved with housing one way or the other for many, many years. My first involvement with housing was being eminently domained from my home when I was about 11 years old. The government took 19 homes to build a junior high school called Ribault, and we moved to another place in the city on the day Kennedy was shot. So that's my first housing experience that I remember, other than living in an apartment before we moved into a home. And then after that time, I had experienced some housing difficulty and a little homelessness and moved from apartments and was dislocated. And then recently, I've been involved with housing issues through organizations, One DC, Empower DC, the DC Peace Team, Street Sense, which I'm very active in, and recently I met Carl, and I've been involved with this organization, which is important. And one of the things I want to say is that working with, we all work with groups that have protests and rallies and meetings, and we do them, and then what happens after that? We wait for someone to call and say, let's do this, let's do that. But when you have an issue like housing, which is a national issue, you need to take heart and do something with yourself. So I'm a big advocate of what they call one-on-ones. And I really embraced it several years ago when I was a fellow for the Center for Popular Democracy for the Fed Up campaign. And Ruben Lucio, who is a longtime organizer, was very adamant that each of us, aside from whatever teamwork or organization we were assigned to, that we do one-on-one work every day, whether that was making a phone call to a congressperson, a city council person, meeting with groups, or meeting with total strangers on the street. Because this is very important. That's one way to be heard. That's another way to promote your issue. So we can all pick up the phone and call our congressperson, and you never know who you're talking to, and you never know who they have access to, and you never know what they can do. And then you talk about what comes after once you make the contact. Well, we have to look and see. That's what elected officials will tell you. Or they say, oh, I heard about that, and there's no money in the budget for this year. Don't accept that. Before you meet with them and hear that comment, do your homework. Attend their meetings. Attend the meetings of those who have views and advocacy contrary to yours, because you cannot respond or react or fight for change if you do not understand or know what you are talking about. Always go to meetings, and if the opportunity presents itself, ask the question. You don't have to be hostile. You don't have to be rude. You can be courteous. You can be nice. Ask the question. No one wants to be asked a question, and you know they're going to give an answer that they do not want their mother, their friends, or the newspapers to hear. And do not be afraid to do that. Do not let them bully you. And let's see, there's so much to be said about this. Well, I will stop with saying that there's lots of training that you can go to. Like I said, there are many organizations locally, nationally, the Urban League, the NAACP, the Center for Popular Democracy, the American Red Cross. Just about any organization you can think of, they have some type of organizing training or event training or lobby day, and you want to participate in that. Now, examples I can give you of people who stood as individuals. There's a woman named Shay Turner who's in Atlanta. She was also a fellow for the Fed Up campaign with the Center for Democracy. She is also a formerly incarcerated person who spent 7 years in jail for something she did not do. But since she has been out, she as an individual has worked with groups called Women on the Rise, which is formerly incarcerated women, to advocate for issues specifically about housing. She's been very active in Atlanta because in Atlanta they have public housing that they sold to private developers, and then the day after they were sold, the people who had access, who had been incarcerated, were told that they could not stay there, they could not move in there, they could not get a credit or background check clearance to live there. So she and people there are fighting that issue very heavily. They also, as individuals, with the jail in Atlanta, there was $46 million it cost a year. They fought when that jail was arresting homeless people to keep their numbers up federally. That jail is now closed. And the coalition of women and organizations that came together are now making the decisions of what type of housing will be in that facility, and a wellness center, and things that will affect women and men. These are things that you can do as an individual. You do not have to wait for the group. You do not have to wait for the money. If you start it, people will follow. And so I highly recommend that you identify a place if you need to have some training, or you can contact Joey or Kyle, yep, and they will be more than happy to tell you the steps that you can take and lead you to resources. I think Joey did a great presentation on the upcoming activities that are coming in May.
Mhm.
Because a lot of what I would have said, he already said. So I will lead with this last little thing. It sounds repetitive, but I will say it anyway. That's if I can find it in my notes. That's terrible. Oh, I'm so sorry. I had it.
I'll just say something really quick.
Okay.
I met Angie at a DC Office of Aging event that focused on housing. Everyone there was with an organization, but she was not, and that kind of struck me as not odd, but it perked my ears up to see an individual come to an event that felt like it was a very professional and organization type run event, but it was good to see a individual resident come and speak their mind. And she put a lot of pressure on the representative from the mayor's office there, which I really respected and thought was great. And I think she gets to a good point about how renters and low-income residents need to, pack the rooms at meetings and events and things like that, like homeowners do often. We hear about NIMBYs going to City Hall and different types of community meetings, homeowner meetings, things like that, and drowning out a lot of the voices of other people that live in the city. So I think that she gets to a great point about what we're trying to do here at NLIHC as well. But I'll let you close out.
That reminds me of one other thing I will mention. HUD had open requests for comments from the public that was very much controlled by the mayor and the city government agencies. And there were several people who were well-known community advocates here in D.C. I was one of them, but I don't think I'm that well-known. We went to the meeting, and they had left us off of the list to testify, said that they did not receive our names, but we knew that they did. So they did recognize us, but our point was to talk about the area median income, the AMI that they're using against people in this city to shut us out of apartments. The area median income for D.C., which is about 80,000. And I always go in a room and I ask, how many people in here make $80,000 a year? Raise your hands. It is not many, if any. And the point being that they use that to keep us out of affordable housing, because that's not affordable. But that's just one of the issues that I think is national. I think it's something that you can fight as an individual. Just go to a meeting and ask the question. You don't have to protest. So I found my notes, and I'm going to leave you with my last ditty, so to speak. Lift and hold your eyeballs up. Google, go to the library, and find out everything you do not know and know not. Write it up. Familiarize yourself with it, and open your mouth. Stretch it wide. Your voice box is confidently on your side. Go out on the street and see the one who can vote and decide. Do not be shy. Take a wide stride. Up, face to face. Open your mouth. Do not let them walk away and hide. Take your fingers, write a letter, make a call, post your collected interactions on Facebook, Twitter, and all. A home run slide. Talk to everyone in the coffee shop, Starbucks, Peace, everywhere. Don't let anyone by. There is no magic to this. It just has to be done. It's not the issue or the problem. It's the energy that needs to be used until the goal is done. You are an army by yourself, and others will follow. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Angie.
Thank you, Angie. That was great. Joey, do you have anything else?
Well, actually, one question I'd love to ask Angie is, I thought this is all really wonderful guidance for the residents who are on the call today in terms of networking and influencing, networking with and influencing elected officials. I'm curious, what are the things and issues you've been working on most recently? What are some of the issues that you as an advocate in DC are mobilizing around right now?
Well, I'm not a leader in any group, and I'm more of a follower. And as an individual, I tend to be a little bit more of a troublemaker or advocate. But the issues I'm really concerned about is the difference between low-income housing and affordable housing. I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned about the rents that are charged in the District of Columbia and who can really afford them. Because when we give developers money, they usually get some type of capital investment discount. They get added infrastructures for water, for parking. That's our tax dollars. That's our money that we should choose how it is used. They build the buildings. They put out the mortgages with the banks, but we can't move in them. We have a right to say, if you're going to build this and we give you these concessions, you must make available so many apartments that are affordable, that are fair. And an affordable does not mean the AMI of $80,000 because we are the District, Maryland, and Virginia. No, we are the District of Columbia, and we need to have housing that is available within what people make here in the district. And this is what I'm passionate about. I'm also passionate about senior housing because the city stopped taking applications for seniors to get housing. At 67, I'm one of those people that needs housing. I think that that's awful. What are we supposed to do? Or is it a message that we're supposed to leave and go live in Cabos, Mexico? Well, they say you can live there for less than, what, $300 a month?
Yeah.
I mean, this is what the message is. But this is not what our city council, our mayor, or the district committee in Congress should be looking at. We're people. We're not a business. Government is not a business. And that's our money, and we want it, and we want to use it for housing.
Right.
So that's what I talk about.
So you're seeing, and I think I've heard this from a lot of resident leaders, that in the District of Columbia, they're building affordable housing. And for those of you who can't see me, I'm using air quotes when I do that, because it's affordable, but not really affordable to anyone in your community, right?
No, it's not affordable.
Right.
I mean, do you make $80,000 a year?
I'm not going to disclose that on this call.
Well, we won't ask you. But most people do not.
Most people don't.
Okay.
There was that issue with the DC Housing Authority where they were going to redevelop their plot of land and build low-income housing. It was supposed to be for people that I think were making 30 to 50%.
Right.
Scrap that plan and put it at 80 to 90%.
When they say 30% AMI, what is that?
Pretty high.
Right.
Well, 30% in DC is probably for a household of four, $30,000, I think.
Yeah, but these places that they're using that for are for one bedroom.
So for
and they look like faucets. Have you seen them?
I have, yeah.
They look like a matchbox.
Indeed.
Do they not?
Yeah.
Could a family of four live in there?
No. So what they should be doing is setting the rent based on the size of the apartment. So if it's a one bedroom, it should be a two-person household or a one-person household AMI.
Well, I think we need to look at, we have families in the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
And we have families like at Brooklyn Manor who are facing displacement, who have been there for like 20, 30 years. And there are 3- and 4-bedroom apartments that they are redesigning to be matchboxes, and it's disrupting families because you have grandmothers, you have families, mothers and fathers and children. And what are they supposed to do? They don't have adult housing foster care. Right. Although I'm sure the mayor could create it, right? Anyway, you see, I'm very passionate.
No, I love it. So you've been doing this kind of advocacy and making connections with as many elected officials as possible for a while here in DC.
Yeah.
Is there a particular victory in your years of activism that you're particularly proud of, or that helps inspire you to keep up the work?
Well, I think the most exciting thing that I've done that I think makes an impact in reaching out to people has been the work with participating in the Black Workers Choir from 1DC. Because what I found and what I see is that when you have an issue and you have an event, if you have artists and poetry and music and slogans, people will remember that most. And when they remember that and they see something, they're like, oh yes, I got to remember to do something about that.
Mhm.
Or it's something they'll remember to talk about to their friends, to their family, at the bar, during the commercials or the Super Bowl or something like that. And from that standpoint, like I said, Brooklyn Manor, I think that made me really happy because our presence, while there were feet on the ground, marching and protesting and going to the hearings and testifying, I think that our presence in that way helped a lot. Plus, it pulled out people who could not do these other things, but they can stand and see. So I don't.
Great.
That's not a victory, but to me, it was a win because of the impact it had.
Well, I got my start in housing activism here in DC because of Brooklyn Manor. That was how I really got involved, and I think
Right.
they're still. They haven't
That's still
done
an
any,
issue.
Yeah, but they still haven't. They haven't moved forward, right?
No.
So they've been holding off, I think. So
No.
that's somewhat of a victory, right?
We need to. That's an issue that we need to help them move forward
Yeah.
because it impacts every other tenant organization and building in the city.
Yeah. Yep.
And there are some visitations that should be made to city council members. Was that Ward 5?
I think it's.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
it's fine.
Mm-hmm. A phone call wouldn't hurt.
Right.
I think that's a good stopping point, unless there are any questions from anybody online.
Don't see any questions right now.
All right. Well, to close out, let me go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there it is.
I just want to remind people that we're going to try and do these webinars every 2 months. So the next call is planned for April 6th. That is the first Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. If you have any ideas for speakers or any topics or anything like that, please feel free to email me. My email is on the screen. It's krbuckle@nlihc.org, or you can email Renee at rwillis@nlihc.org. And if there are any questions, we can end the call here. Nothing.
No, it doesn't look like we have any questions. So thanks everybody for joining us today.